How long was he sick?
He retired about 8 years before he died. He'd go to work and he'd have to sit down on the way home and rest. His lungs was just, one of his lungs was gone.
Was that from the coal mine?
Yeah, it was from the coal mines and the mines there at Copper Hill too. They said that his lungs were just like a sifter. They had holes in them. And he would lay there in the bed, and I know that he was praying for God to take care of Mama and us kids. I just know he was. So when he died, that was 1st February, she got the check. So she missed March. And then the government passed a law bill to pay the orphans and the widows. By April, she got that check back double. She got $65 she started drawing. See, she's drawing for each one of us then.
What do you remember about Joe when he got killed?
Joe had just been back from out of service. He was in the bad part of war too. And he just got discharged out. And I swear he went to work the next day, as well as I'm remembering. On a Sunday evening, he went to work. And Pat Patterson, he laid out, Matt's husband. Somebody had died, granddaddy or somebody. And then somebody had to double over that night. And Joe is the one, he was the last one getting his boots on, so he decided he'd work overtime for him. And he'd built the house, and he needed the money too, see, real bad. They were on it's kind of like a lift, I guess, that they all could get on and go up. And Joe said it'd been giving them some trouble, acting like it was stuck. But anyway, that time when it did, as it went up, and when it got almost to the top, they could see up there, it flipped over and dumped them all back down in the mines. There's 4, there's all H's. Hawkins, Huffman, Hickey, and Hughes. Clarence, he went out to funeral home. They let him see. He didn't see him, but they showed him the duffel bag that he was in. And after that, sometime after that, somebody found his partial teeth in the mines.
And you remember about Pearl? Were you out there when?
No, I was at school, but I remember Glenn's told me about it so many times. He was with her when she got burned. It was a real windy day. Joe and Earl had raising some calves, and Joe was going up on that hill behind Mama. They set that side on fire, Joe did. Joe, and Glenn was little. He was Glenn wasn't even in school. And Joe went to the other side to set that one on fire. And when he was over there, she said to him, "Glenn, my dress is on fire." And he called Joe, and Joe came over and he picked her up. And this man next door to us, Jace Gibbs, now it wasn't John lived over there, but it was his brother. He looked over there and saw what was going on, and he came running over there and took his coat off and wrapped her up in it and carried her down to the house to Mama. And she lived till that night and died. And they buried her the next morning. They had to. The doctor said, they couldn't embalm her or nothing. And you couldn't touch her. It'd leave the prints of your hands on her. And she buried up there at Paintertown. And when they brought Earl, when he had that stroke, and they brought him home from Kentucky to the nursing home in Ducktown, Earl was talking, and he brought his sister Pearl. You know, her name was never ever mentioned, but Earl was talking about her there in the nursing home that night. But anyway, I don't know if I've told y'all this or not. One night, about 2 weeks before she burned, I was sleeping. There's so many of us, we had 2 beds in each room. And in the back room, I think there's 3. Well, I was in the bed with Ruth, and I was awake sometime during the night, and this little girl was standing there by our bed eating ice cream, and she walked over to Mom and Daddy's bed, and then she come back over to our bed, and I said, I believe I'll wake Ruth up and show her. And something said to me, no, don't do that. And then she did that several trips over from us to to Mom and Daddy. And then when she died, she had ice cream. It's what she wanted was ice cream. They gave her ice cream, and she had on a white dress, and they fixed a wire, some kind of a hood like wire over the bed, and put a white sheet over that to where it would show, to keep that cover off of her. And but she died that night. And when we first started to school, where the city hall is now, you know where the city hall is.
Across from the theater, kinda?
No, it's our first red light in McCaysville. It's right there beside of it.
Yeah.
The school had 4 big rooms downstairs and 4 rooms upstairs. Mama started me to school 3 years before I ever finished 1 year.
Yeah.
She'd start me to school, and then the first real cold day it come, she'd say, it's too cold for you to go to school, you're not going to school today. Mama had so much on her at home, and she'd keep me out of school to help her, you know, with the younger ones there, and wash and everything that had to be done. I'd have to stay out of school. Well, how can you keep up in school if you don't go? While they were building the new school up on top of the hill, we went to the First Baptist to school. We went to school in their Sunday school rooms behind the church. And that was when I was in the 3rd grade. Then we went up to the new school on top of the hill the next year.
Now, how far did you go in school?
Me, I was ready to graduate into high school to the 7th. I went to the 7th. And Mama's mother died when she was 9 years old. And then whoever took them in, they wasn't interested in her going to school. It was just, that's why Mama's back was dragged. She got sick, and she said she had, I think she had some kind of rheumatism, something with her back. She never could straighten up anymore. Well, of course, they weren't going to pay out money raising 4 kids. I think they Grandma King came to Copper Hill on the train, and she took Mama and Alma and Pauline and George home with her. And they lived down there in Dalton. And he worked at the cotton mill, and that was their living. I don't figure he'd made much, but you didn't need much to live back then. But I feel like that Mama never got the care from a doctor that she needed. And then slowly, as she got older and growed, well, her back just got bigger. Mama could read good. Oh, she could read and spell. She went to school a little, but no, she didn't go to school much. When they wanted probably to send her, she lived with them for a while, and then as she began to get a little older, she lived in Canton with her aunt at one time.
Do you know what aunt?
That would have been on the Davis side. I never did know about any of her people. Grandpa Davis's family that lived there in Canton. I don't know why I never asked, never thought it mattered, you know.
And she worked at the cotton mill there.
And she worked at the cotton mill there in Canton. And then she come back home and she lived with Aunt Laura. And I don't know about the rest. George must have come back. Yeah, I know in the meantime, George got a job at the company. He wasn't, but he was underage, but they hired him as a water boy to carry water to them. And he rented, you know where the big old house out by the railroad burned, the big 2-story house. Ruth lived in it for a while. Well, anyway, right there where you turn off to go out to Mama's, back like you're going towards town, there stood 2 old houses. George rented one of them houses, and they all lived there by themselves. And Mama met Daddy and married him, and I reckon all of them just sort of married off. As old, Mama was 17 by then when she got married. And Lord behold, she had one kid right after the other one.
And they built the house?
Then after Clarence was born, Daddy got this big notion to go to Kentucky and go to work coal mine. And they went, and he got a job. And while he was up there working, Ruth was born, and Joe was born there in Kentucky. And then they moved from there to somewhere in Tennessee, and Earl was born. Then they decided to come back to Copper Hill. And they came back to Copper Hill, and they lived in that old house down there where Earl lived. That's where their house was, an old house that I don't know how they all lived in it, and Grandma and Manuel lived there at that time, but they moved in with her. And there's where I come into the world.
Yeah.
And they were building on that house then. They started building the house. And they got the house built and moved from that up there into that.
How many rooms was that house then, up on the hill, when they built?
When they built the house, when they built it, it had 4 big rooms. And it had a porch all the way across the front and the side, and Lord, you could live on the porch. They put enough in that porch to build another room or a bathroom one in that house. Later on, they added on to that, built the kitchen and turned the old kitchen into a bedroom. We had in that old kitchen, they built that room. There was 2 beds in that. Big beds in there. And then in the living room, there was 1 bed. I believe by then there's so many married off, she didn't have one in there. She had a couch in the living room. That's what you can remember, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then in that back bedroom, she just had just one bed. And in, I believe, her bedroom, I believe she just had a half bed in there. The night Mama got sick, I called up there, and after I come in from work, or either I was late cooking one, I don't know which, but anyway, I was cooking. Yeah, I worked out the greenhouse. I called Mama, and when she answered the telephone, I knew she was sick because she couldn't hardly talk. And I said, Mama, you're sick. Well, I'd been up there the day before, which was Sunday, and she said, I'm going to clean that refrigerator, that nasty refrigerator up tomorrow. And I'd say, well, Mama, what are you going to clean? It's spotless. Her refrigerator was. I didn't, but she'd take every little thing out of that. And she was in that icy refrigerator all day. And so it gave her that death of cold. And then I called her that night. And I said, Mama, you're sick. She said, yeah, I am. Well, I knew it was working on that old refrigerator, staying in that ice all day. And I said, I'm a-cooking, and when I finish, I'm coming up there and I'll bring you a plate. Okay, when I finished the meal, and I went on Mama's and took her plate, and she eat all of that food, you know, and she got tickled about Miss Gibbs had told her that her cat had diarrhea all over the Chester drawers. And Mama's laughing about that, but she didn't do much laughing for she's so sick. So I went on home and I got out in the yard, and something said to me, why don't you spend the night? And I thought, I can't spend the night. The kids are at home. One was at work. He'd swing shift. He'd work evening shift, day shift, night shift. And he was working night shift then, see. So I went on home. I've always wished I'd turn around and went back and stayed with her. But anyway, I called her the first thing next morning, and she didn't answer the telephone. And I thought, there's something wrong because she's sick last night. Ruth called me and asked me if I'd heard from Mama. And I said, no. And she said, well, I bet she's taking a bath. And I said, no, she's not taking no bath. She's sick. She's real sick last night. And I said, I'm going up there as soon as what? I don't know what it was. Maybe I got the kids off to school. Anyway, I went up there, and when I got up there, she was in the living room, and she said after I left that she went in there to go to bed, and she had a half bed, and she said that she fell, and she lay there and hollered for a long time, and before daylight, she crawled back into the living room, just one room from where she's at, and managed to get up in the chair. But anyway, I called Ruth. I went upstairs and called Ruth and told her to call an ambulance and come over there, and we took her to the hospital. And we did, and that was the last of her. She stayed out there About 3 weeks, I believe, and died. She did die in February.
So it's
If she had
much longer.
lived on until July, she would have been 80 years old. She died when she's 79.
Daddy was 79.
But he would have been 80 in January, wouldn't he?
Now, tell me about Betty and who was had a black daddy. How did all that come about?
Mama's brother, George, married May. Well, this happened on May's side of the family. Myrna was her name. She worked at a restaurant down there in town, and there's a black man worked in there with her. And this doctor that delivered Betty's baby told Betty that he went out there one morning early and said, Betty, Myrna and this black man was in the kitchen, and said they were playing with one another, like hitting one another and jumping back, you know, just carrying on like that. He said, I said, oh no. He told Betty, he said, now that's where you come from. And then he bailed it out of town, I guess, when he found out she was pregnant. He left. And that was May's sister, Althea, that had Myrna. And Myrna had Betty.
Yeah.
And then Betty had Nancy.
But Betty, they wouldn't let her go to school.
They wouldn't let her go to school. She went to Williamstown Church, though, all in our years of growing up. I did too. We went with Virginia Williams and her kids, and Matt and Betty, Marge. Yeah, we all walked up there to school. To church. Every time the doors opened, because that's the only place we had to go. You know, there wasn't no place for kids to go back then. Myrna had Betty, and then she had Bug, and then she had Hugh. May's mother was still living, and they lived in the house with May. George and May lived in the house with Ma. I always called her Ma, like they did. But anyway, they told May if all of May's brothers and sisters, they would give her that place if she would agree for Betty and Bug to stay there. And May agreed that she would. And that's how it come her to raise Betty and Bug. Betty raised Bug.
What was his real name? Bug?
When he started school,
Yeah.
they named him that morning. His name was Charles. They named him.
Yeah.
Glenn says he went to school with him that morning and said that Jeanette said, well, just tell him your name's Charles.
What was your first job?
Lord, when I was real young, I would have been real young. Virginia, this woman, I still think the world of her. She's dead. I helped her with her kids and in her house when I was, Lord, young. And then I worked down there, I reckon the next one, I worked in a grocery store for a while. And I worked at that donut shop. So that. And after I married Lon, I didn't work for till after all my kids were born.
And where'd you meet him?
Lon, well, he's raised out of Copper Hill. I worked at this donut shop, and that was the place for the other side, Tennessee side, to hang out, the young people, and that's where I met him.
And that's
Yeah. had a machine made donuts and hamburgers and all, but it was mostly for the school kids. That was their hangout place. Yeah, I knew everybody in town at that time. But Lon went into service. He went on to finish school, and then he was called into service, and he served 2 years. I think it was 51 and 52. He served in the Army, and then he was discharged. And then when I run into him in town, and he wanted me to go to a show with him. And I said, no, I can't. Oh, come on, go. Just kept on go. So this girl I was with said, well, why don't you just go on with him? I knew him very well, and I did. And that's how I come to be Evelyn Quinn.